Welcome back to OtakuDaiKun. Dai here. If you're familiar with my work here on YouTube, then you know how much I despise censorship. Beyond my mantra, celebrate your fandom, I made this channel with the goal of having a voice, while a lot of my favorite anime and games were being censored for various reasons. It started with nasty Nintendo censorship with Fire Emblem and Tokyo Mirage Sessions, but now it's a widespread problem infecting companies like Sony and Steam, as well as being a cultural danger. Certain Western viewpoints have deemed the more lewd parts of the anime fandom as problematic, and are putting pressure not only on distribution platforms, but also on the very artists making that content. All I want is for the actual artists behind my anime to have the creative freedom to make what they are passionate about, without them being under any sort of duress, either perceived or literal. One of the larger threats to fighting censorship happens to be people who find excuses for it. We call these people censorship apologists, people who aren't actually doing any censoring, but wind up dismissing our concerns about it. Thankfully, I've discovered a meme going around titled Censorship Apologist Bingo, which catalogs a decent number of these excuses. I imagine it's meant for people to gauge how apologetic they are regarding censorship, but somehow I doubt most actual apologists are willing to be that self-aware. Even so, it's great having all these excuses in one place. So for today's video, I plan on debunking the entire board in order to demonstrate that censorship is a legitimate problem, and that apologists are only hurting our efforts to resolve it. In the spirit of bingo, I'll go about this by generating random numbers between 1 and 25. It's not actually bingo, but that's not really the point. Let's start with the free space.
I'll buy it anyway.
This is actually rather tricky. What do you do when a company takes an anime or game from Japan and censors it for your market? The natural instinct is to boycott it, but as we'll get into later, that doesn't always work. I admit, it's in cases like this where piracy seems genuinely heroic. Fans can translate the Japanese version so that we can enjoy it while not supporting the practice of censorship. Other times, mods and patches can restore what was taken from us. In general, though, there are times when you're forced to either go without a product or give in to that censorship. It's not fair to put fans through that, so if you do wind up buying a censored version, hopefully you do so with some degree of reluctance. Next up is,
free expression means that artists are free to censor themselves.
This is a disingenuous claim, because it assumes that an artist actually wants to censor themselves. There's really only one reason they'd do such a thing, and that's to internalize public complaints. An artist may choose to censor themselves from the get-go, so they don't have to worry about having to release multiple versions or make changes later. Of course, they have every right to do this, but that doesn't mean it was their deepest desire to do so. If artists didn't feel any sort of pressure, I can guarantee you that a good chunk of their work would turn out to be more expressive. We should foster that type of openness, and question whenever an artist or developer chooses to tone down their own work, especially when they've had a history of being much bolder with their ideas. Next is,
I actually prefer the censored version.
I hate when people say this. It's the exact same issue when an anime gets butchered in localization. Sure, we can point to moments where we actually prefer a censored or localized version of something, but that doesn't mean we should normalize the practice. If you insist on releasing a censored product, please consider finding a way to make that product's original content available as well. I can get behind the idea of options, or making adult-themed material exclusive to an online patch. Just because a censored version meets success, though, that doesn't mean the uncensored version wouldn't have done just as well. At the very least, it too deserves a proper release, regardless of what people consider to be better. Next,
they needed a lower age rating to make a profit.
This just shows the fallibility of the existing gaming market. First, we need to confirm if the censorship was actually necessary to earn a certain rating. Sometimes, developers are so scared of being rejected that they preemptively censor things, even if the ESRB, Sero, or PEGI never actually had an issue. Second, devs should be allowed to submit their games multiple times for ratings. That way, a specific line can be drawn for what is and isn't appropriate. Third, devs should be allowed to release multiple versions of their product, kinda like how movies have unrated versions. While a dev might face pressure to censor their work, and are perfectly justified for trying to make as much money as they can, that just means we need to direct our frustrations toward the rating systems themselves.
They created it. They have the right to edit it.
This is almost exactly the same as the freedom of expression excuse. The issue isn't that a creator is expressing their right to edit their own work. It's that oftentimes, someone is making or pressuring them to do so. Sure, it sucks to see an artist censor themselves, but there's almost always someone higher up the chain of command that's actually dictating the changes. Personally, I don't feel platforms like Steam or Sony, or any kind of localization staff, should have any right to edit an artist's work. If you tell a creator that they need to change their work in order to be on your platform, that's the same thing as forcing them to make those changes, meaning it was you who made those changes, not them.
It made the medium seem immature.
This is the classic Last of Us versus Senran Kagura dilemma. PlayStation allowed The Last of Us 2 to have a full-on sex scene with a topless chick. They allowed this because of propaganda, claiming it was artistic and not intended to be pleasing to the viewer. It also came from a major AAA developer who was guaranteed to make them a ton of money. On the flip side, Senran Kagura Burst Renewal wasn't allowed to have its intimacy mode, despite not being nearly as graphic. Honestly, I don't give a rat's ass what a bunch of pompous fart sniffers think about my anime. It's a huge industry that makes way more money than more mature forms of media, like movies or books. The whole notion of a mature medium in the first place is nothing but groundless propaganda.
Nobody forced them to censor it.
There is always someone to blame for censorship. Often, it's literally someone in the chain of command, a middleman between the artist and you as a consumer, demanding that the work be changed. Other times, it's a generalized societal pressure to change the work. Maybe an artist is worried about what the Twitter mobs will think. Again, maybe they're afraid that Steam will reject them, wasting their only chance to submit their work, so they change things in anticipation of a backlash. The culture of censorship itself is more than enough to force an artist's hand.
If you want to fap, go watch something else.
I can directly cite this excuse as what essentially killed Senran Kagura and Dead or Alive Extreme in the West. Whenever a company or localizer would censor something they deemed minor, they'd often say not to worry, because it's not like they're trying to take away your intentionally lewd games. Them censoring Fire Emblem isn't some attempt to take away Senran Kagura. They say that, but in truth, it's just a matter of moving the goalpost. For a while, DOAX and Senran Kagura were used as the scapegoats.
Dude, if you want to fap to a video game, just go buy one of those.
First, that doesn't really resolve the fact that I wanted said content in other games too. Second, it turns out they were going after those more lewd games. It was just a matter of time. So yeah, pointing to something less regulated and telling us to go there doesn't really work. People who want to be offended will eventually find everything. It also pisses me off because it assumes that all things being censored are inappropriate by nature. Wanting to play a Metroid game where Samus takes off her suit at the end isn't the same thing as wanting a full-on H scene made in Source Filmmaker or something. For instance, Velvet in Tales of Berseria is sexy, and I might want to slash up monsters as a hot babe. That transcends being something to fap to.
Is the censored content so important to you?
Ah yes, let's just dismiss our concerns by saying it's not a big deal, and that we're weird for caring so much. Thankfully, this one's easy to counter. If someone cared enough about that content to censor it, that means we can care just as much to want that content put back. By censoring it in the first place, it's already being deemed important. So yeah, if it's important to them, it's important to me.
It's not censorship per se.
Arguing the semantics of what constitutes as censorship gets us nowhere. Let it be said that censorship does not just mean when some oppressive government criminalizes certain ideas. Places like China and North Korea have a huge problem with that, and it's absolutely terrible that people there can't properly express themselves. But that doesn't mean Nintendo Treehouse removing pelvic shading in Tokyo Mirage Sessions wasn't an act of censorship. Yes, anime and games are first world luxuries. They aren't as important as places that demand book burnings or will lock you up for criticizing their national policies. However, Just because there are worse instances out there, that doesn't make other instances irrelevant. If an artist is so much as tempted by outside pressure to change their work, then it counts as censorship.
It's a cultural difference.
Yeah, so? Anime and Japanese games are popular overseas because they happen to be Japanese. We should be celebrating those differences, not burying them. Obviously, different nations have different laws and morals, but this is a matter of fictional entertainment. Oppressing that is just thought policing. Plus, as it pertains to places like the United States, assuming what American culture even means is a pointless endeavor, we don't all think the same way. So censoring a work to appeal to an American audience doesn't really work, because you're operating on a perceived idea of what Americans think that just isn't universal.
The censored version was done by the same artist.
We see this a lot when 2D anime games get censored. They'll sometimes hire the original artist to go back and cover up their existing designs. Even when this happens, pointing it out doesn't really accomplish anything. Just because you pay an artist to make a new version of their work, that doesn't say anything about which version the artist prefers. They're not the ones who have to feel the weight of getting a covered up or inferior product. That's an issue for us consumers.
Gameplay is the only thing that matters.
That might be the only thing that matters to you, but obviously you're not the only customer out there. I've played tons of games over the years, and I've learned that I'd rather play a game with the right art style and aesthetics, even if it's a bit rough around the edges mechanically, than a game that looks unappealing but plays wonderfully. I'll pass up even the most immersive open world ever created if I can't experience it through an attractive character.
They barely changed anything.
Again, if it stood out enough for them to censor it, then it stood out enough for us to take notice. No change is too small. Even if it's not a big enough change to affect me personally, I still hate when we don't get the exact same version Japan got.
This sort of thing just happens all the time.
Allowing yourself to be complacent with censorship just allows it to keep happening. Yeah, it happens all the time, which is exactly why we need to stand up to it.
Some censorship is good.
Oh, I've been waiting for this one. When it comes to fictional entertainment, the mere exploration of ideas, censorship is never acceptable. I challenge you all to point out even a single instance where censoring fiction has been morally beneficial.
We wouldn't have it at all if it weren't censored.
This is one of the more understandable takes. Oftentimes, the only thing keeping us from a given anime or game is the language barrier. If we all knew Japanese, we could all just import their version and be done with it. If you rely on a translation, though, then that means you're at the mercy of whomever distributes your international version. You may hate the censored release, but it's the only one truly available to you. Even so, that excuse doesn't really work, because our goal is to convince companies, and society at large, to respect and appreciate Japan's works as they are. Even if we can only get our anime with a layer of censorship, that doesn't mean we want that censorship. Again, this is where piracy, or fan translations, can come and save the day.
Entertainment is not art. It doesn't deserve artistic freedom.
Huh. Tell that to all the morons in game development who want to make video games that aren't fun. No joke, these are things that Naughty Dog and Square Enix have flat out admitted. I'll just let The Office speak for me.
It's called hentai, and it's art.
Won't somebody please think of the children? I've got two bones to pick with this one. First, the majority of things being censored are intended for teenagers and adults. For instance, what possible target audience exists for the censored version of World's End Harem? People who enjoy stories about sex, but have a phobia of nipples? Second, I often disagree with what Western society thinks is and isn't appropriate for children. Having, say, Mai Shiranui in the background of Super Smash Bros. Isn't going to corrupt children's minds. Boobs are not the enemy. Rather, the younger you are, the more likely you'll be feeding off them for milk. Violent video games certainly get their share of undeserved hatred, but the West's desire to condemn the natural human body never ceases to amaze me.
Move to a different country if you hate our laws so much.
Now, if you really do live in an oppressive nation, perhaps moving would actually be a good idea. Chances are the worst nations are the ones that wouldn't let you. That said, moving to another country, especially one that doesn't speak the same language, involves a lot more factors than just being in a place where you can buy uncensored anime. Don't get me wrong, Japan is awesome, but it's not for everyone, and it's totally reasonable for an anime fan to want access to uncensored content in their own language. Also, this stuff is not being censored on legal grounds, and if they were, this would be even more of an issue. Instead, it's mostly private businesses and cultural biases that are to blame. The saddest part is that even if you learn Japanese or go to Japan, that doesn't guarantee you uncensored anime either. With now American companies like Sony putting pressure on Japanese developers, we've seen artists increasingly attacked for the works they make. The West's woke toxicity is able to influence even the Japanese, leading to a state where if a company in Japan pledges to appeal to a global market, we can basically interpret that as them losing the will to fight. We can't allow ourselves to become like that.
You only wanted to buy it for the uncensored scene anyway.
Sometimes it's a matter of principle, though. We'll boycott a title that we actually really want to experience, just so we can send a message to the guys who censored it. Still, I'll admit there are times when the specific thing I wanted to work for was exactly what got censored. When that's the case, I feel totally justified boycotting it. The one thing I cared about was the one thing they got rid of. We enjoy things for different reasons, so condemning any one of those reasons doesn't really accomplish anything. Excuse me for having common decency. This one's less of an excuse and more of a straight-up attack. If you claim to have the moral high ground and are getting defensive around people who want their uncensored anime, that implies you were in fact responsible for that censorship. In that case, you're part of what creates that cultural pressure, and I would ask that you keep your moral values in reality separate from what people want to experience in a fictional environment. In other words, let fiction be fiction. Obviously, not everyone running pedestrians over in GTA is gonna do that IRL, nor would they at all find that satisfying in the same way in reality. Please just let people enjoy what they enjoy.
You just want an excuse to whine.
On the contrary, if people didn't already whine about a bit of TNA or some politically incorrect gags in our anime and games, there wouldn't be any pressure to censor things. Our complaints are a direct response to the practice that we want to ban. The day we never have to worry about censorship is the day we stop complaining about it. Generally, I go through media and think to myself, I bet this part is someone pissed off, and sure enough, I'll find people trying to get it censored.
Stop it. Get some help.
Just go watch it on YouTube.
I find this one funny because, as a YouTube content creator, I have to watch what I say or show if I want to stay monetized. Maybe, assuming a censored version is obscure and just a cutscene, I could find it on YouTube, but that's hardly satisfying. Video games are an interactive medium, and the entire reason certain publishers are okay with people live streaming their games is because they know that if fans actually want to play the games for themselves, they'll spend some money. If it is something that's just meant to be watched, then if you find it on YouTube, chances are that's piracy, and I've already said that's one way people fight censorship. In general, if I have to pirate something just to get it uncensored, there's no way I'm gonna buy the censored version on top of that. I'll find other ways to support the industry I love.
If you boycott it, they won't bother localizing the sequels.
This is the best excuse that exists for consuming censored goods. It comes from having horrible PR, where companies refuse to listen to their fans. If a product doesn't sell well, there's no guarantee that a company will think, oh, this had potential, but we lost sales due to censorship. Because they never tried to release it uncensored, they'll never know for sure if that was truly the issue. They are far more likely to just drop the series entirely, assuming people just don't have interest in it. If you do buy it, they won't listen when you ask for an uncensored version. They already got your money, and that makes them think they've made the right call. I really wish there were a way of cataloging the number of people who would have bought something if only an uncensored version existed. The closest thing we have to that right now is when a game releases on both Switch and PlayStation. We'll figure out the PlayStation version is censored in advance, so if the Switch version outsells the PlayStation version, that might indicate it's because people prefer it uncensored. The devs that do this aren't really as big of a problem, though. They are giving us options, after all. It just sucks seeing Sony still make money with all their crappy policies in effect. There's a real dilemma there, in that the PS4 and PS5 are objectively better performing consoles than the Switch. So even if a game is censored, depending on how severe that censorship winds up, it can be hard to justify buying a game on a system with worse graphics. I'm not so radical as to condemn people for ever buying a censored product. I can totally understand why someone would do that, and I've occasionally done it also. This excuse does apply to why you would buy a censored version, but it doesn't excuse the fact that fans hate being in this dilemma in the first place. Hopefully, if you find yourself in this boat, you'll find other ways to vocalize your disapproval. At the very least, it's better than staying silent. Part of me wanted to make this video in response to something Natalie X Hunter said to me during my livestream with her. She said, from her perspective as someone who writes and publishes novels, sometimes you have no choice but to censor your stuff if you want to actually sell it. She's absolutely right. If I want to thrive on YouTube, I need to censor my own content, and y'all know damn well I'd love to make spicier content than I already do. When I complain about censorship and advocate against it, however, I'm not necessarily targeting one specific person. Sometimes I'm pointing out the entire oppressive system that allows for censorship. In that regard, it's an invisible or formless enemy. That makes fighting for anime all the more difficult, and the last thing we really need is a bunch of lame excuses that attempt to undermine how important the issue is. So yeah, I don't think any of these bingo excuses should ever deter anyone from pushing forward with the narrative that artists should be allowed to make whatever fictional content they want without any sort of external pressure to limit their creativity. This is a discussion video though, so I now invite you all to agree or disagree with me in the comments below. Before I go ahead and roll the credits, I want to give a special shout out to all my $10 and up supporters: VideoGamer75, C. James Torley, Stephen Elak, Samuel Gersten, Otaku Mom, Jens Ballman, Mystic Samurai 1983, Freebrick, Cosmonaut, RNG or Shuffles 1498, Alexis Yukio Gomez Yamato, Johnny Tsunami, Link Pendrago, Caitlin P, Vladimir Rovna, Succubus Sakura, and SF Giants fan Mike. Thank you all so much. Thanks for watching!
If you enjoy this channel, help us grow by liking, commenting, sharing the video, subscribing to OtakuDaiKun, and
most of all, smashing that notification bell so you don't miss out on all of our anime discussion, lore, or Let's Play content.
You can support us directly through Patreon, Subscribestar, or our YouTube membership, all of which come with benefits like exclusive vids and early access.
As always,
celebrate your fandom!